I'd like to thank the Federation for the opportunity to come here and address this conference. I know it's a key event in the calendar for group schemes, but it's my first opportunity since I took over as Head of Water Division in the department to attend and to address the conference. I know that County Mayo is something of a stronghold for group schemes, so possibly in common with some people in the room, I grew up in County Mayo. For the early part of my life, water was pumped from a private well, but in my early teens, we were connected to the Callow group scheme. I remember pretty well the community effort and wide voluntary participation in developing and getting the scheme delivered, and I knew some of the individuals that played a role. So it does give me some understanding of the community ownership that is at the heart of the group schemes and that laid the foundations for the schemes as they now are today. The Water Division in the department works around two overarching and interconnected goals. First goal is to protect water pollution and to protect restore the quality of rivers, lakes and groundwater. The second goal is to ensure that we have world-class water services, as you would expect in a modern, prosperous first world economy. All water services, public or private, should reach this high standard. Water pollution is increasingly mentioned in the context of the triple planetary crisis as identified by the United Nations. The triple planetary crisis describes the three intersecting global environmental crises of pollution, climate change and biodiversity loss, which interconnect to increase environmental risks and threaten global economic loss. Despite the title, these are not threats to the planet per se. The planet has already proven its durability over the millennia. Rather, it's a threat to the human habitat and the survivability of the human race. The pollution crisis includes various forms of pollution spanning air pollution, soil contamination and water pollution. It's easy to be blasé in Ireland about the availability of quality water, but in fact, our natural resources of water are in decline, and they are not infinite in nature. That is why we have to take measures to reverse the trend of water pollution. Last week, as referenced by the Minister, we launched the Water Action Plan, which is a legal requirement under the Water Framework Directive, setting out a programme of measures to protect water. The directive sets the target of getting our water bodies to achieve good ecological status. With almost half of our rivers and lakes below the required standard, a lot of work remains to be done to achieve the ambition of the directive. And you'll hear much more about this in the second session of the conference programme, including from my colleague Donald Cronin. I want to turn now to water services. The key guiding light for water services policy is the government's Water Services Policy Statement. It is in fact a statutory requirement under the Water Services Acts, and that is required to be prepared and set out, and I quote, the policy objectives and priorities of the government regarding the provision of water services in the state. The most recent statement was adopted and published in February this year, covering the period 2024 to 2030. While it is a major document for Uisce Éireann, it is not only a policy for Uisce Éireann. It covers all water services and as such is the key point of reference for rural water services. While high level in nature, the statement has three objectives supported by a series of priorities. The first objective concerns availability and reliability of water services. It commits to supporting regionally balanced economic and social development through accessible, dependable and reliable water services. The priorities under this objective are focused on improving public and private water services through continued investment in infrastructure, both through Uisce Éireann and through the group water sector. The second objective concerns safety and quality of water services. As you will know, the public system has shown better results in terms of quality, and while group schemes as a whole are not far behind, we need to do more to achieve improvements. Private wells are obviously a significant concern in that respect also, as referenced by the Minister. The final objective of the policy statement is sustainability. Water services need to work for the long term, and that will necessitate that the provision of services supports the national climate change targets, that we tackle losses through leakage, and that water conservation forms a cornerstone of water policy. I want to put some emphasis on that final point. As we all know, in many economies, water charges serve to promote sparing use of water. In Ireland, we do not have that motivation for customers. We need to find alternative ways, therefore, of building awareness of the value of water, the cost of providing drinking water, and the need to be sparing in its use. The Central Statistics Office reported that in 2022, of the metered domestic customers on the Uisce Éireann system, just 10% of them used 35% of the water. This suggests that there is a huge variability in the amount of water use by different domestic users, and you have to be suspicious that there are high levels of wasteful use of water, be that through leakage or otherwise. This is an issue for the group schemes as well. Wasteful use of water drives the need for higher treatment capacity and generates costs that could be avoided. In any area of public policy, all progress depends on collaborative effort. The implementation of change can only be achieved with the support of the stakeholder community and, generally speaking, the public at large. In the water sector, there are many bodies that have important roles to play, and most are listed here on the slide. The key point, though, that I want to make is that in the department we recognise and we are committed to collaborative working. We need all parties to work together, bringing diverse perspectives and approaches to problem solving so we can find the best solutions. We seek to ensure that we have an open bilateral relationship with all of the key parties, and I'm confident that we are open and receptive to all views. I know there is an extensive and consistent engagement between the Rural Water Unit and the Federation, and we in the department certainly value this engagement. Many of the stakeholders here also come together through the Rural Water Working Group on a collective basis. In 2018, the Minister tasked the Rural Water Working Group with a wide remit following a recommendation of the 2017 report of the Joint Oireachtas Committee on the Future Funding of Domestic Water Services. In essence, the key role of the group is to provide advice to the Minister through the Water Division of the Department on how appropriate exchequer resources are best applied to capital investment programmes and operational costs in the rural water sector. It also looks more generally at the performance of the sector in terms of serving its customer base and what policy interventions might be appropriate. I chair the group, but it also brings together the Federation, County and City Management Association, Environmental Protection Agency, the Health Service Executive and the Department of Rural and Community Development. The Federation is central to the work of the group, and I can assure you that it is very effective in highlighting the issues arising for members and the kind of solutions required. It may be just one voice around the table, but its input is invaluable in bringing the coalface experience of providing water services, and it has proven highly influential. Some of the key issues on the agenda for the Rural Water Working Group are on the slide here, relate to funding, DBO contracts, private wells and the institutional framework governing the sector. And I'm going to look at these in turn. So starting with funding. I think by and large, the funding that has been provided to support rural water has been broadly adequate and is comparable to the funding provided to support the public system. We provide three streams of funding to the rural water sector: capital and current funding for the group schemes, and grant support to households for private wells and effective domestic wastewater treatment systems. Some of the slides here show how funding has evolved over the years. Funding of 61.5 million was paid in 2023, and I expect a similar outturn at the end of 2024. But this slide here shows how over a long period funding has evolved. Looking at capital expenditure first, to capital funding to the rural group schemes and also for wells and septic tanks. You see that there was this massive increase in the noughties, and it has fallen then to kind of capital maintenance levels at around 20 million, but rising a little bit in recent years. And then on the operational side, you'll see that, from, again, the noughties, there has been a continuing increase in the operational costs and quite a steep increase over recent years. Annual funding now is of the order of 40 million. 40 million, and we expect that to continue and maybe grow a little bit into the future. If I turn now to the multi-annual capital programme, and I want to look back first at the 2019 to 2021 programme. Under that programme, we approved funding for 621 projects in total, and we've paid out 67 million for those projects to date. Returns made to us by the local authorities last year showed that nationally there were commitments of just over 31 million involving 168 projects that are outstanding under that programme. They're projects that haven't commenced. The department wrote to the local authorities in July requesting them to engage with the promoters of the outstanding projects, basically to set out the need to progress the projects or to risk losing the funding. Fundamentally, schemes or projects that do not complete the planning stage by the end of 2024 face losing the allocated funding. We simply cannot keep a commitment on the books for projects that are not being progressed. We have to provide the available funding to where improvements are being delivered on the ground rather than to projects that remain aspirational. For the 2024 to 2026 capital programme launched earlier this year, we did a lot of work with the Federation to streamline the process and to ensure that guidance to local authorities was clear and helpful. We've been rewarded with nearly 900 applications, so we have our work cut out to get through them. I can say, though, that the work we did in providing guidance has paid off, and nearly all the applications received meet the basic criteria set down. As the Minister said, the expert panel is now looking at these applications, and I expect that there will be an announcement of at least the first block of decisions in the coming weeks. From the earlier side in capital investment, you'll have seen that there was a heavy programme of investment in the noughties, and that was when many of the treatment plants were developed through design, build and operate contracts, which were put in place for a duration of 20 years, generally speaking. The approach was a response to the need to take urgent measures to improve water quality, a problem that was not by any means confined to the private sector, and a series of DBOs were developed at the same time in the public system. The contracts have, I think, been very successful in protecting the quality of service provision in the rural water sector. With contractors serving some 50,000 households, the DBO plants account for about 70% of the private group water sector. Many of these contracts are now reaching their end dates, and given the public funding support for these contracts, the public procurement rules apply, and it is necessary to re-tender for the contracts to continue to operate and develop these plants. This does give rise to a question as to how best to approach this. Right now there are 17 bundles embracing 139 schemes. Is that the right way to bundle the contracts for the future? What term should any new contracts have? 20 years or something different? These are questions that we will work through in the DBO working group, which has been established to oversee the contract re-tendering process. The group includes the Federation as well as colleagues from my own water division, both technical and rural water, and from the local authorities who will lead on the re-tendering, and from Ishgarin with the benefit of their in-depth experience that they've gained in this area. We're also engaging expert advice for the duration of the process of designing the new contracts. We need to move to decisions soon. In principle, we should settle on an approach early in 2025 with the aim of having new contracts developed by mid-2026 so that tendering and finalisation of the first contracts can be completed by end 2027. I'm now going to turn to the Tobin report. I think many in the audience will be well familiar with the report and its findings, which have been presented to many of you in the sector previously. I think the report has proven to be invaluable as an overall assessment of the state of the rural water sector and in highlighting things that are working well and some of the challenges. It has served to broadly confirm the value of the various policies and actions that we are taking. There are two fundamental questions that we have not answered, though, in relation to the future of the sector, and they relate to the roles being undertaken by local authorities concerning regulatory supervision of group schemes and the governance and administration of the schemes. We're not approaching this with any predetermined conclusion, but we are cognizant that the role of local authorities in water services has changed very significantly. The service level agreements between local authorities and Uisce Éireann have ended, and given that local authority employees are now operating under the overall direction and control of Uisce Éireann, many local authorities no longer have access to the same level of water-related expertise and resources as in the recent past. Key stakeholders in this process are the Federation as representatives of group schemes, the County and City Managers Management Association, and Forum Uisce, the HSE and DPA. We are engaging with those parties on the best way forward, and we will bring any emerging views back to the Rural Water Working Group before making any final recommendation to the Minister. I know that the focus of the vast majority in this room is on the group schemes, but about 1/3 of households have private wastewater systems, while about 10% have private wells. Minister Noonan pointed to the concerns about private wells, and there is strong evidence that wells are not the subject of proper management and testing have risks for public health when compared with the public or group water supplies. We have assembled an expert group to consider how to tackle this in a proportionate way. A major element is to build awareness of the risks that are there, so that households are empowered to consider options and manage the risks. I think that we can have a complacency in this country about water quality that assumes good quality drinking water is readily available, but that is not always the case. For domestic wastewater treatment systems, generally septic tanks, the risks are environmental. Under the law, it is the responsibility of the householder to maintain the septic tanks in good working order. Through inspections, we know that compliance is not at the level we would like to see, and for that reason, we have provided for increased grants from 1 January 2024 for remediation of septic tanks that are underperforming, where the tanks are in sensitive areas in terms of risk to water quality. The grants are not universally available, and eligibility is subject to inspection. There is some increase, though, in the eligible geographic areas in the latest Water Action Plan published last week. Okay, so now for my final slide, I want to turn to looking at the future and where we plan to be in 5 years. We will continue to recognise the important role played by group water schemes in providing water services, and will therefore seek to ensure that sufficient financial resources are available to support the service being provided by you, the sector, on a sustainable basis. We will prioritise water quality issues with a view to closing the difference that exists in compliance with the applicable drinking water standards between the group sector and public supplies. The issues with trihalomethanes should be finally resolved. In a similar vein, we will have taken measures to reduce risk to those households that continue to depend on private wells for water supply. A key challenge is to ensure sustainability and that all private group schemes are alert to the need to adopt measures to protect water sources. It is the first link in the chain from source to tap, and apart from other benefits, avoiding water pollution in the first instance is more efficient than taking contaminants out of raw water in the process of producing drinking water. The arrangements for renewal of DBO contracts will be well underway, and we will have finalised their deliberations over the institutional arrangements and implemented any appropriate changes arising from the findings of the Tobin report. Finally, we will have learned new things from this round of the multi-annual capital programme and from the ongoing and consistent engagement with the stakeholder community, and we will have a new programme underway. As an absolutely final point, I can't leave this podium without paying tribute to the excellent work done by Barry Dean as CEO of the Federation over a long period. I can assure you he has been relentless in pursuing the interests of the sector and has always kept us on our toes in the department, and indeed has never failed to let us know when we were disappointing him. That said, it was always done with good grace, professionalism and the spirit of collaboration, and I wish him well in his new role in LawPro. Of course, I also want to welcome Mark Farrelly as his successor into the CEO role, and we look forward to working closely with Mark and indeed with all his colleagues in the Federation. Thank you very much for your attention.